Hey guys, today I'm going to show you a little trick I came up with to make in the hoop plushies or plushie pieces that allow you to have embroidery on both sides that lines up perfectly every time. So I use Stitch Area Universal. I think any program that lets you digitize your own files should do the trick. Most of the things we'll be doing here are quite simple. So I've already gone ahead and created a small keychain type plush in the shape of a mitten. When I do in the hoop plushies, I try to keep my outline stitch to a repetition of 2 just to make sure that it's strong and secure. And I've gone ahead and left a little gap here for flipping and stuffing once the plushie is done. So we're going to go ahead and decorate the front of our mitten. I'm going to add 2 things, an applique and also a satin stitch that's going to span across the front of the mitten and then continue on to the back. So we'll start with our applique. I'm just going to add a small simple circle design here. So this stitch is going to be the one that's going to hold our fabric down, and then we'll go ahead and create a copy, make sure it lines up perfectly, and then turn that one into our satin stitch. Now we're going to add the satin stitch that's going to go across the front of the mitten. Make this a little bit thicker. And you want to make sure that when you create any embroidery that goes beyond the edges of your design, whether it's a satin stitch or a pattern fill, that it goes beyond your outline just a little bit, just to make sure that when you put it together that you don't end up with a little gap between your embroidery and the edge of your plush. It doesn't need to be a lot, just enough so that you have a bit of wiggle room. So now we have the front of our mitten designed. So the next step is to create a vertical running stitch that's going to be the same height as your design. The important thing here is you want to make sure that this running stitch is exactly 90 degrees to the bottom of your design. And I won't explain this now because it probably won't make much sense. But once it's time to put this all together and we embroider it, you'll see why we need to do this. You want to make sure that it can be a little bit higher or a little bit lower than your design, but I would try to keep it as close to the same height as possible. And you want to make sure that it's close to your design, but not too close. I usually try to keep it at about 1/4 inch, but anywhere between 1/4 inch and 1 inch should be fine. So now that we have our vertical running stitch, we're going to go ahead and select everything. Create a copy and paste. Now before we unselect anything, the first thing we're going to do is create a horizontal mirror of our design. And then you may want to zoom in for this just to make it easier because this is very important. You're going to want to move your design so that both of your vertical running stitches line up perfectly. And again, I'll explain this later. It will make much more sense. So now we have the front and the back of our mitten designed. I'm going to go ahead and change the back design just a little bit, just to put something different. Instead of the applique, I'm going to go put just a uniform area pattern, again just in the shape of a circle, just to have something different. And then if we want, we can also go ahead and change the shape of our satin stitch here, but we want to make sure that the ends stay where they are because we know that this is where it's going to line up perfectly with the front of our mitten. So if we want, we can add a few points in here and then make a curve if we want. For the purpose of the tutorial, I'm just going to leave it as is. But know that you can change this and it will work as long as your start and your end points on either end don't move. So now everything's designed. We just need to remove a few things and make sure everything embroiders in the proper order. Just like regular in the hoop, we don't need to do our outline twice. So we can go ahead and delete one of them. Personal preference, I like to keep the one on the left. We can also go ahead and delete one of our 2 vertical lines. We only need one of them. So now we have our design ready. We want to make sure that everything stitches in the proper order. The first thing you want to have stitch is your vertical stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 1. And the last thing you want to stitch is your plushie outline. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 7. And everything else is personal preference, however you want to set that up, however you would normally do your embroidery. Right now I have my satin stitch first, then I have my satin stitch, and then I have my circle. So I'm going to leave this the way it is. It should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and save that out, and I will see you at the embroidery machine. So I've gone ahead and set everything up in the embroidery machine. I have my tearaway stabilizer in the bottom, which is important when you're doing in the hoop, just to make sure that you can remove every single bit of stabilizer from your plush. And then I have my white fabric, which is going to be the color of the mitten, and then a scrap of pink for the applique. So I'm going to go ahead and embroider this and speed up the video for most of it because it's just typical embroidery. Once we get back to a point where it's important, I will slow down the video again. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done all the embroidery except for the outline stitch. I've removed my top stabilizer and cut off any loose threads. So we're now ready to do the step that's going to allow us to have both our sides embroidered and aligned perfectly. So if you remember from earlier, I had my outline stitch on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and work on this side. So what you want to do is you want to cut out your fabric as close to your hoop as possible, all the way around, starting from the top of your design here where your vertical stitch lines up, and go all the way around to the bottom. You want to try to not cut your stabilizer as much as possible. We don't really need it anymore, but it does help stabilize everything in your hoop. Even if you poke a few holes in it, it's not a big deal, but I would try to keep it as intact as possible. So I'm going to go ahead. This sometimes takes a little bit of time, and it's a little tricky. It's much easier if your design's smaller than your hoop. Here we have about 1 inch, so it's a lot easier. And you want to make sure you don't pull anything out of your hoop either. So you want to be kind of gentle with it. Now once you have that cut out, you're going to notice that everything's still attached to this. So you want to go ahead and release your pattern from the stabilizer, and this is where the tearaway comes in handy. You need to cut away a few threads along the way. There. So now we have a flap. cut a little bit more over here. There, we have a flap. And as you can see, when you fold it over, it lands exactly on top of the other one and everything lines up perfectly. And this is where our vertical running stitch is. So you can just see it a little bit. So what you want to do is you want to pin down this flap. You want to make sure that it's tight against your running stitch, your vertical running stitch, but you don't want to stretch your fabric because then it won't line up anymore. So you want to make it as tight as possible here, but just kind of, you know, smooth it out a little bit when it gets to the other side, and then pin it as much as you want. So I'm going to bring this back to the embroidery machine and do my outline stitch, and I will be back. So now the embroidery is done. I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the hoop and cut it out and show you the results. So this is the result of our little plush, a little mitten plush. As you can see, we have perfectly lined up embroidery on both sides. It goes all the way around. The only drawback with this kind of technique is that you will need a hoop that is twice the width or twice the height of your design, as opposed to regular in the hoop, which is just the size of your design. I don't think I would make anything that's much smaller than 5x7 or 5x7 hoop, unless you want something that's quite small. I'm also working on a small in the hoop plush that uses this technique. I'm hoping to be able to add it to my Etsy shop soon. I'll keep you guys posted and let you know when it's there. So I hope this was useful, and thank you for watching.